Alright guys, so we're back in the studio and it's day 3 of being here at Westcott Barton. You can hop back and look at a few of the other videos, a couple of the other videos where I explain what I'm doing here. Today, it's kind of nearly lunchtime, the students are going to be here in a few hours and I'm going to get out there and actually do some acrylic painting. Fantastic medium, all the same principles, it's just a different medium. Have to approach it in a slightly different way. Let's get out there, see what we can find, have a bit of fun with the paint. Right guys, so I've not actually come far from the studio. It's just started to rain a little bit, but it's also really hot at the same time. I've got a great little subject. I'm working in acrylics, so I instantly feel a bit more confident. I painted with acrylics for a long time, and as I always say to my students, just keep putting paint on till it looks good. It's kind of that simple. We still need to think about tone and shape and colour and composition, but in terms of the actual technicalities of the painting, we can just keep slapping paint on. Great medium for getting out and sketching because it's quicker drying than oils, more forgiving than watercolour. Got a great little subject. I just love the way that the light and shadow between the water and the archway and the bricks and then the foliage around it. I'm going to move over the giant leaves on the left to almost kind of get a lot closer in, make a more interesting composition. And I think that's an interesting point because how often is your subject and what we're looking at, how often is it going to make a perfect painting exactly as it is? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Sometimes we actually need to be creative with what we're doing and we need to maybe move a few things around to make an interesting composition. And as long as it looks fine and feels good to you, that's the most important thing. We're creating a painting. We're not copying the subject perfectly, and I want to create a painting here that is inspired by being in this setting and what's in front of me, but I don't feel that I have to stick to it at all costs. In fact, actually, I'm going to break away from it quite significantly to have more fun and create a good painting. I use heavy-bodied acrylics because I come from an oil painting background. I like the creaminess, the thickness, so that they feel like oil painting, really dry a bit quicker. And the joy of the heavy-bodied stuff is even on a big slant like this, so we're working on quite a tilt, generally they tend to hold up and you can have your painting quite front on and at a high angle, and you can also have your palette right next to you. And this becomes a really nice, simple, easy to use setup where you don't really have to take your eye off the subject that much. Got the water pot here, and I don't really use many tube greens in watercolour, but I've found myself in acrylic using them more and more. So I've got titanium white, phthalo blue for really vibrant greens, cobalt blue, just I feel comfortable having a warm and a cool blue. Don't need much red, it's just there to help mix the greens and the greys. I've then got a dark hooker's green and a bright green light, and the yellow ochre may creep in a little bit. So it's, in some ways it's a limited palette, and I could do it without those and just have a brighter yellow in there, which actually I've forgotten, so I'm going to pop a yellow out. Now let's just get painting. The thing I like about acrylics is you can get your masses in pretty quickly. We can stick some dark on, stick some light on. You can go in and out of your darks and lights immediately. So it gives you more freedom tonally, I find, when blocking in. You can just kind of get everything blocked in very quickly. The other big mistake I see with acrylics all the time is people using too much water. Great if you're after a watercolour style, but on the whole, beyond an initial wash, it's really just water to clean out the brush, take all of the excess water out, and then I'm chasing that kind of creamy consistency after that. That's what I want, that kind of creamy consistency. And with just enough water in the brush that this stuff goes on really nicely. It's got, like I said, it's got that creaminess to it, and it goes on like this. Not super thick, but not watery. And you'll have a much better time. And then when it comes to the lights, get those lights on really nice and thick and juicy. So this is the block-in stage. So firstly, you can see the benefit of having something that's not just white underneath. You have this yellow ochre poking through, and actually it enlivens the painting but also holds it together because it's more of a mid-tone. If that was white poking through everywhere, the painting would fall apart more tonally. So when we're faced with a whole load of greens, the best thing I have found to do is to constantly vary them almost every time you go to the palette. Like here's a cooler green up here. So there's more blue in there, more minty. White helps cool things down a bit and pastelizes the colour. The colours are warmer greens in here, so more yellow. Slightly more muted yellowy green here, very bright yellow over here. So thinking almost like the first wash of a watercolour where you're laying in the colours, the only difference is we've gone darker and light at the same time. But it's the same sort of principle. Now this is what I call a block-in, and now it's time to refine it. And there's two things that are going to refine and bring an acrylic painting to a finish. One is bringing in the lights and using creamier paint. So I kind of see those two as the same thing. So creamy thick paint over the top of the thinner washes makes acrylic look amazing, and looking for the smaller, more refined shapes in places using that creamier, thicker paint. So let's kind of bring it to life. You can just build up little shapes, just building up brush strokes. Skimming colours over the top is a great thing to do, so just kind of taking a creamy colour and skimming it over the top. You can build up texture and form very quickly, and colours underneath drying very quickly, so I can just kind of get the stonework very quickly just hinted at, and then you can get increasingly lighter and thicker with the paint as you move to the smaller shapes. So working from big to small always. Just giving the illusion of our subject very simply. Some great shapes over the arch here. And we'll build more on top of this, but it's just real simple to start with. Just a simple version of our subject. Just laying these brush strokes, surface dragging, so mixing a nice creamy paint and just dragging it over the surface of the dry paint underneath, and you get these beautiful broken brush strokes. I love texture and broken brush strokes. Finding that balance of detail and lack of detail. Having a huge amount of fun with it. I've started in the focal point, so that's going to have the highest level of complexity, the highest level of refinement, the smaller shapes, probably some of the brighter lights. And again, we've got this kind of foreground, although it's not the focal point, midground, which is the focal point, and then a very simple background just to support the main event, really. It's like the support act. But this is great, guys. Yet again, I'm reminded of what a wonderful experience it is painting from life. I mean, especially a setting like this. It's so quiet. I've just got the sound of the stream behind me. There are a couple of people in the courtyard, but it's so relaxed and so mellow. I've got a little robin that's joined me for the duration. There seems to be a raven that appears in every video I've done so far, which is interesting. And this is just wonderful. Just really getting in the zone with this painting. In many ways with acrylic, because you can just keep piling paint on, it's a slightly different process. It feels less urgent and slightly more kind of just going through with a rhythm like this is quite nice. Just different from watercolour, no better, no worse. I'm just enjoying it. Finding it easier to get a result that is closer to what I might produce in the studio, interestingly, with acrylics. But then I don't use acrylics much these days because I much prefer watercolour. But this is really great fun, having a huge amount of fun with it, and yeah, I'm just going to keep going with it, keep putting the paint on, see what we end up with. So there comes a point in any painting when you have to start asking yourself, what is it that you're trying to achieve? Are you just making brush marks for the sake of it? This is something I ask my students a lot. Or are you trying to achieve something with it, and is what you're trying to achieve in alignment with your your vision for the painting? And if you're kind of just dabbing away, not really achieving much, then that probably means you are at the end of the painting and you need to take one final look and pop on those little details to bring it to life. And that's the stage I'm at. So I'm just going to show you the last kind of 5 minutes of painting is going to be a little bit more light to bring in here. Might go to a smaller brush, and then let's bring the focal point to life. It's quite an important part of the painting, even though it's only the last sort of 5%, if you want to call it that. And it's generally creamy lights. I find. You might find there's a few little extra darks to pop in, but most of those will be done by now. So it's like little creamy lights, thick paint, no water in the brush whatsoever, or the lights will die as you put them on. Not the same level of brightness everywhere, probably brighter around the focal point, but we can definitely get away with some stronger lights here. And the sunlight has come out, hasn't been out this entire time, but it's come out just as I come to put on the lights, which is very, very kind of it. So it's just illuminated the edge of this here. And look at that, sunlight's just popped out. Beautiful. You could spend a day just painting those leaves and you could do them a lot more justice than I have. But in my painting, and this is an important thing, they're the supporting act to the main event, so they don't have quite as much attention on them as you might initially think they deserve. But if I was to come back and paint just these leaves, then that would be a very different story. But look at the light on here. We've got all, see, this is one of the problems with painting from life, is that now suddenly the sunlight's come out and the subject looks completely different, but I'm right at the very end of the painting. Now the mistake would be to start trying to make this look like that. It doesn't mean that I can't take and steal little interesting bits. Like I love the way the edge of this here is just catching the light more, and it's giving it a little bit more depth. There's also rain as well. Quite a lot of rain. So let's get it moving pretty quick. So that's a good way to stop me from fiddling. Thanks for the sun and thanks for the rain. But look at all that light coming in. Light just catching there as well. I might have to duck for cover, but I don't think it's going to hang around for long. Look at the way that area has come to life, and that's because the light suddenly appeared and it gave me an idea of what I needed to do to bring it to life. It's also now some seriously bright white lights on there, and that allows me then to judge how light I can go elsewhere. But we don't want to push everything too light. Be careful of falling into the trap of lightening everything. That's always a mistake. Okay, we're gonna have to duck for cover here. I think we might go back into the studio just to finish this off. Okay guys, so I'm back in the studio. The rain kicked in, making it a little trickier to paint. So one of the things I mentioned then was that it's actually quite nice to bring a painting in without the reference in front of you, because with the reference there we start to fall into the trap of what you should put in, whereas just looking at the painting in its own right, forgetting the reference, we can start to ask ourselves, what does the painting need to look better? Not what should I put in to make it more like the subject, to make it finished. Just look at the painting in its own right and probably spend 5 minutes just bringing it to life. The last stage of the painting, you're kind of constantly pushing the lights more and more, trying to get the feeling of light in the painting. The lights can die back a little bit in acrylic. The heavy body helps with that. Having no water in the brush really helps with that. Laying it on thicker than feels comfortable will really make your acrylics pop, and I'm really pleased with that as a final painting. It's given me a little taste of acrylics again, and whilst it's hard to beat watercolour for me because I love it, that was a huge amount of fun. Very different process, much more intensive in some ways. It took longer, you're physically mixing the paint. More watercolour, you can cover a huge amount of ground very quickly. You can let the paint do a lot of the work. Painting light and shadow, a lot of watercolour sorts itself out. Acrylic, you have to be a bit more laboured. It's a different process, even though we're using the same principles. I think breaking up my watercolour painting with acrylics is great. It keeps you looking at your subject in a certain way. You have to look at it in terms of brush strokes and shapes and light and shadow, particularly when you're working from life. So I think that's no bad thing to do that every so often. It's going to keep my watercolour painting fresh and exciting, and not kind of stop me getting bored with watercolour, which I don't think would happen, but you kind of know what I mean. So that's it guys, I hope you got something out of that. I hope you enjoyed it. Please do consider subscribing for loads more videos to come, these plein air ones and the normal tutorials. Links to the online watercolour school, the online masterclass series, Zoom demos, all of that stuff is in the descriptions. The links are in there. And until next time, happy painting.